Welcome, friends, to the Someone Gets Me podcast. I am your host, Dianne A, and I am so delighted that you're here. This podcast was created because I believe there is a visionary leader inside each one of us who is waiting to be seen. In each episode of Someone Gets Me, you will hear useful tips from successful visionaries who will share their stories about how being seen has allowed them to take their vision out into the world with action. Hi, everybody. It's Dianne here at Someone Gets Me. Today, we are talking about the power and healing energy of music. And no better person to have with us about how music can just inspire us than Rich Daniels. He's the music director of the City Lights Orchestra in Chicago. So I'm in Florida, he's in Chicago, and we are going to have a great conversation so that you can leave us feeling inspired, motivated, hopeful, and you can rejoice. So welcome, Rich, to the show.
Thank you, Diane. I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I'm so glad that you said yes. And the first question I have, because reading your resume is just, it's amazing. I started reading and I'm like, wow. So that's why I'm going to put the whole resume in the show notes, because it was really impressive. And one of the things that first popped in my mind was, what started you as a freshman, of wanting to get into the music and being a music director, the things you did from a very young age? How did all that get started?
Like so many of us, I was surrounded by a lot of really great people in my life, and I had people who mentored me and realized my vision and bring a dream to reality. I had a great love of music from the time I was very young. My father would play storybook albums, and I remember them all. I actually still own. If you look behind my shoulder, I'm one of those people who refuse to get rid of their vinyl. So the vinyls over there and the storybook albums featured magnificent orchestras and wonderful tales, and it was I'm certain that the music I heard in those storybook albums played a significant role in developing me for a love of music and for a love of these magnificent orchestrations that were a part of that. These are those Disney recordings that featured 70 and 80 musicians, and they were, narrated by various authors and whatnot. So I think the love of music was instilled in me very early. And by the time I was a freshman in high school, I really, really wanted to pursue music on a full-time basis. And it was just something I felt passionately about. I don't remember why, but then all of a sudden, people were just so supportive. Some would question my sanity. I get that.
Right.
I have a wife and 4 children. I think they would qualify that to this day. But that keeps life fun and interesting when we get to follow our dreams. How blessed are we to be able to follow our dreams and fulfill what we want and have that passion still? And so early on was a lot of exposure to music. And then freshman year, we started something called the Big Band Machine in Chicago, which was a 14 to 16 piece big band playing music of the big band era. And that was largely due by friends I had made who had like minds. And the father of one of those friends, a man named Jim Moore, who spent his last years down by you in Florida in the Tampa Bay area, passed away about 5 years ago, but a magnificent man, a mentor, a friend, and his son and his family remain dear, dear friends. But he played in one of the Army Air Force jazz bands. And so he took that information, he had all the charts, all the inspiration, he brought it to us. And he was, without having been ever paid as a motivational speaker, Diane, if you met Jim Moore, you would say, oh my gosh, this man should have his own show, because he was just so dynamic, so giving, so inspiring. And what he did for me when I was a young man is unrepayable, because it was an amazing sense of motivation and inspiration. I think that's what he wanted to do. Mm-hmm. But he was a trumpet player, and his mentoring was just phenomenal. So we got very fortunate to run into the right people at the right time in my life.
Oh, that's great. And you were open to receive it. Sometimes the right mentor shows up and the person's not open to receive it. So I think those storybook albums kind of made the ground fertile. And then when the right people showed up, you knew, aha, that's great.
A lot of good fortune, truly. And, for me, the road has been, really all over the map. I think that I tell all the young musicians I get to interact with, I find it very joyful in my life at this stage. I'm 60 years old. I look like 103. I'm not. I'm 60.
You don't look like you're 103 to me. Not at all.
But I get to mentor a lot of young players through all the work I've done in television in the last 10 years. We had over 400 young people appear on the television show Empire, which I was the music director on for 6 seasons. And those people were between the ages of 18 and 30. And one of the things I got to tell them on a regular basis is that you're on this path, you're on this journey, you're on a road. You don't necessarily know where it's going to take you. So sometimes when the fork appears, don't be fearful of going that way. I've had certain bends and twists in my path that I never ever would have expected. And so, and by having the willingness to go down those roads, it's amazing what you can discover. I mean, you know that it's just amazing where the path of life can take us.
Right. And being curious and being willing to just try the path and see where it goes. And that open-mindedness is what pays off. And I think that that's a common kind of mindset with a lot of people who are artistic and creative in that way. Don't you think?
I think so. You know, my favorite story of recent times is that I like to tell the young people that my background was as a saxophone player. My primary instrument is the saxophone. I started conducting when I was in my late teens, but saxophone has always been my main instrument. So jazz, big band music, things of that nature, things with horns were always a big part of my vocabulary. But 6 years ago, when I was 54 years old, I was asked to sign on to a hip hop television show as a music director, which was exciting and daunting. And at the same time, I wound up touring with something called a Jerry Garcia Symphonic Celebration with a man named Warren Haynes, who's a very well-known guitar player out of that world of Grateful Dead music and whatnot. Now,
Right.
if you'd asked me 6 years ago to name if you put a gun to my head and say, name a Grateful Dead song 6 years ago, I'd be dead. I didn't know their music from Adam. I was very unfamiliar with Jerry Garcia, but I found a great affection, a great love. So it was great to be able to learn, discover. So again, the path took me to a hip hop television show and to this magnificent artist named Warren Haynes and the music of Jerry Garcia, performing with orchestras all over the country. The Baltimore Symphony, the Colorado Symphony, we did a TV show with, on and on. But it was being open and not being fearful to look at an opportunity when it's presented to us and say, I can try this. I can do this. Let me see what happens. You know, and it's just so exciting when you get to follow the road and see where it takes you.
Right. And when you follow that road, it's usually got a bend in it that completely is unsuspecting. Like, who would figure Jerry Garcia would pop in your life for that music and you would love it and be part of it? You know, like that doesn't even seem to go together. Orchestra, Jerry Garcia, but it
No.
does if you're open, you know?
Right, and it led to some wonderful opportunity. We played at Red Rocks, which is that magnificent venue in Colorado, and that was with the Colorado Symphony, 10,000 people in a packed house on Jerry Garcia's birthday, August 1st, 2016. I mean, obviously Jerry's been gone 35 years, but it was a wonderful opportunity and experience, especially when you get to play in nature like that with a magnificent orchestra. There were 80 pieces in the Colorado Symphony, and Warren Haynes and his band out in front. And what I discovered was that Jerry was an incredibly gifted composer. He could tell stories. He could write melodies that didn't always, when we sussed them out for the full orchestra with Warren, they took a little bit of a twist themselves, but Jerry's kids were there, which was wonderful too, approving and complimenting what we had done and created with the project. And it was just I was shocked to find something so interesting and compelling at that age, and to discover new music at that point, which is part of life, right? We always want to keep discovering new things, always want to keep learning.
Yes. Yeah. The more we keep discovering, I think the more it keeps us alive and vibrant
Yes.
and cruising
Yes.
along, right? I use an analogy a lot with my clients that our teams, our groups, our peer groups are much like an orchestra. That, you know, everybody has their own instrument and there's this beautiful music that goes with it, and the space between the notes is often just magical and amazing. And so I've always wanted to ask a director, and I have you here. How do you bring together all of these amazing facets in a way? Like, what happens within you that does that? Because it's so, to me, it's when I am in the audience listening to an orchestra, I am mesmerized. And I pick out certain people, like I can feel their energy, like, oh, I see that person or that or whatever. And then I watch a conductor and I just watch it all. And to me, it's just, there's no words for the level of power of it. And so I always use that kind of as an analogy. So I'd love to know, how do you bring it all together?
Well, it takes a lot of wonderful musicians in front of you, you know, because
Right.
Conducting is a silent art form. You know, the best conducting requires no verbal skills at all. It requires the ability to make eye contact with people, to give them direction with your hands, your body, and to communicate in that way. It's nonverbal communication at a very high level. So it's important. When you see a conductor screaming at an orchestra while they're rehearsing, you want to go up and slap them and say, what are you doing? You're trying to offer corrections while you're conducting and bring all these wonderful people together, and you're talking over them at the same time. You have to stop. You have to then verbalize if necessary, and then go on. And of course, during a performance, no verbalization at all. But your idea of using an orchestra as an analogy is great. We did that 30 years ago with the business community for some corporate producers I worked for around the country, and we had a program called Orchestrating Your Success. And we would bring an orchestra into the business community, and the marketing department would be the woodwinds, and the public relations department would be the strings, and human resources would be the percussion. And we would draw analogies between their particular enterprise and an orchestra, and how when everything comes together, this great harmonic sound of this large team, there were all these analogies. They were very, very inspiring to the folks in the community. What we found even more fun was people in the business world had music backgrounds that they cherished, that had been dormant in many of their lives forever. And all of a sudden they're saying, any chance that we could maybe be a part of the orchestra? We played years ago. We'd like to think we could still play now if we sit next to somebody who knows what they're doing. So that became a big part of the program. By surprise, all of a sudden, a dozen of the people in their corporation would come up on stage with their instruments and join in. And it was magical, I'll be honest, because this took them out of their corporate environment, their safe, well-known environment and structure, and it put them in a world that they loved and was somewhat foreign to them, and it excited them in a way that was it was powerful. It really was. So it brought music to their events and to their special meetings, and it brought the analogy of what an orchestra means and how an orchestra can be this great gathering of minds and individuals who come together and form this really tremendous team. And again, the whole concept that it's nonverbal communication. You're communicating, if you're a musician, with your instrument or with your voice. If you're a conductor, with your arms and your body and your eyes. So it's this wonderful connection that I think we all like to make in our lives when we meet people or when we walk down the street. Sometimes you can feel a connection, and sometimes it's misread. All of a sudden, you'll walk past somebody and they might have a frown on their face, and you think, "Oh, this guy's having a bad day," or "He must be no fun at all." And all of a sudden, as they get closer, they raise their corners of their mouth and they smile and say, "Oh, misread that one."
Right.
There's just so much to that interpersonal relationship that we get through music or through connecting with people with nonverbal skills. It's well worth studying, I think.
Oh, I think that's amazing. And I think because it's nonverbal, it bypasses the ego that's not our amigo. So as I say, it bypasses all that linear stuff. And so that's why I think those people woke up in the program. Like you got that dormant part of them like alive again. It was always in there. And what a gift they received beyond all the rest of it. They got to awaken that core passion, because I think music, when it resonates with our heart and our brain, can be very healing and touches us in ways that words are pedestrian.
Absolutely. And, it took them out of the world of spreadsheets and bottom lines and whatever they concentrate on a regular basis. And it allowed them to, I don't have the exact quote, but it was President Kennedy who had that beautiful quote about the fact that a society that doesn't value the arts and doesn't value what they bring to a society and to the community, there's no point in, really perpetuating that society forward. Without that level of engagement in our world, what are we struggling for? What are we working hard for if we don't have the beauty and the things that make us a full, well-rounded person? It can't all be about work and hard work and all the things it requires of so many people, especially in this day and age when so many people are suffering and so many people are just wound up so tight. I would like to think that art and music can help relieve the stress, relieve the burden, bring them to a more peaceful place. My wife is a first responder. She's a nurse in a hospital that has third largest population of COVID patients in Cook County. And if your listeners are familiar with Cook County, it's a multi-million person county that includes Chicago. And we're right on the very edge of the Chicago city limits where her hospital is, third largest population of COVID patients. So she comes home and I know she's just stressed out. She's tired. She's worked 12 hours. She's, and watching what's going on. And I hear stories about musicians who are going near the hospital or into the hospital in some cases, providing that sense of healing, that sense of taking people to another place when they're suffering. There's a whole level of ministry that people are involved with. I'm sadly not, but they use music in a healing way. There's something supernatural about music and what it can do. I mean, what music is. You can't touch it, you can't grab it. You can see an instrument, you can see a piece of sheet music, but the music itself is ethereal. I mean, we don't put our hands on it. It requires all of our other senses to appreciate it for the most part. It's quite spiritual and quite magical.
Yes, totally. It totally is. And you can, you can hear the same piece from different orchestras or different bands and have completely different experiences. And because it's not tangible and it's ethereal, and wherever you are or wherever the musicians are and all those different things bring it together to really inspire us deeply at our core.
It does, and it's a large team of people. Music is a non-competitive sport. People often say, "Gee, who's the greatest guitar player of all time? Who's the best?" Wait a minute, you're thinking about this all wrong. There is no such thing. Okay,
Right.
there's great art, and there's good and there's bad, and there's what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy. What you enjoy might very well be what someone else doesn't enjoy quite as much. It's non-competitive. We shouldn't be ranking it, which is why the Grammys and all the award shows get a little offensive after a while, because it looks at music as a commodity. And I get it. I understand. I've worked in the world of business, the business of music for 40 years. And I know that people have to make a living, and God bless the producers who create the environments for us to feed our families and do our thing. But it shouldn't be viewed as a competition, as something that requires someone to be better than somebody else. Save that for football, baseball, hockey, and basketball. That's where that exists and it lives. This is not that. This is, what moves you to whatever level you want to be moved to on a given day. As a saxophone player, I still play, and I love it dearly. But I've had occasion to be asked to play at a funeral or the occasional memorial service for someone, and people ask for a specific selection. And so those have been some of the most moving moments that I've been a part of. And when I feel the interaction with people in those high stress situations, it's stunning. I'll be honest. I find myself almost hyperventilating because it's so emotionally charged. The moment is that when you participate at something like that, it takes on a whole other level of meaning, and it's very, very deep and worth contemplating when you come out of the other side of that.
Right. It's it's transforming in a lot of ways, I believe. That coming together, it all gets amplified for the people.
Absolutely, and we've been at concerts with the orchestra where people are touched by music in ways that they can't even verbalize. And that's it's a great feeling for those of us who have been on the other side of the stage, trying to bring that to them, to realize that they're being moved in a way that we would hope they might be moved, and they're
Right.
feeling things in a way that's very powerful to them. So music is very, very powerful that way.
Yes, that's why I love it so much. So most of us in the world, we use music for fun and for relaxation. Do you use music for fun and relaxation too, or what do
Oh,
you do? What
absolutely,
do you do for you?
absolutely. Oh yeah, even though we live in Chicago, we've got a nice pool and a deck and all that, and I've got the speakers blaring, and the neighbors are very tolerant of it. But it'll be anything from Stevie Wonder to Duke Ellington coming out of my speakers on any given day in the summertime. And I'm one of those people, because I love the nice weather, that I try and expand the summertime. I try to start it in late April and carry it through mid to October if I can. So
Right.
I don't let the weather get in the way of enjoying our fun outside. But yeah, music is gratefully amazingly enjoyable on many levels. And I've got lots of playlists on my various mechanisms of play devices for whoever is riding in the car with me, if it's one of my children or my wife, trying to sometimes please them and what they would enjoy. Or when we play something in the yard, it's all about enjoyment and letting people feel it in a way that's going to move them.
Oh, that's beautiful. So that just when you're saying that, I could feel music coming like from your soul out into the world. Like it's not just your job, and it's just not because the right people showed up. It's like a soul thing.
Well,
And
it's the old story. I've never worked a day in my life, and I guess in some ways that's to a certain degree true.
yeah, that's absolutely stunning and beautiful. So if somebody was out listening to us, and I'm sure there's somebody listening to us now thinking like, oh, I should pick up my instrument again, or I should get back into music again, or I need more music in my life, and they've been hesitant or kind of holding themselves back, what would you say to that person?
I would say dive in with both feet. There's no reason not to. There's always room and always time to improve ourselves. And if you feel passionately about something, grab the guitar, you sit in front of the piano. Pick up the old flute that you put in storage 30 years ago, drag it back out. It's cathartic to be able to create music, even by yourself. People find it's very, very life changing for them when they can create music. And then people often will tell you who aren't musicians, I wish I could. Well, the answer is you could. You may not become Paganini. You might not be a virtuoso. That's irrelevant. Some of the best musicians in the world never learned how to read music. Uh, Quick story. 2002, I was just starting an office in the city. I had a business partner, my buddy Dean Rolando, who's been with me for years, pianist at the orchestra. He was in the office with me. And 2002, cell phones were pretty primitive at that point. And I had a little flip phone, and it was ringing and had a number on it that I didn't recognize. I just shoved it aside on my desk. And Dean said, "Who was that?" I said, "I don't know. It's another wrong number." At that point, nobody had cell phones. I said, "If I don't recognize, it's a wrong number." People want me to call me on a hard line. It was 2002. No one used cell phones.
Right.
About 20 minutes later, the phone rang again, same number. Dean saw it, and I said, "That's it, same. Just leave it be." And he said, "Well, just answer it. You don't know. Just answer it." It's fine. I answer the phone. So, hello. And there's a voice with an English accent on the other end. So, is this Rich Daniels? Yeah, it is. Who's speaking? And he gave me his name. He says, "I'm over at the United Center, which is our 30,000 seat arena that the Bulls play at. It's the big stadium in Chicago, the United Center. I'm over at the United Center, and we're doing some work on an incoming show. And we've got a guest here that wants a saxophone lesson. I know you're a conductor, but we understand you also play the saxophone. Would you be available to give a lesson to one of our VIPs today?" So, well, I'm not a teacher. I said, "I've done master classes, but I'm not a teacher." But I said, "Tell me more." I said, "Well, it's just a VIP, and we saw your offices on Ohio Street in the city, and this guest is staying at the Ritz-Carlton just a few blocks away. Would you might be able to pop over there and give her a lesson?" And I said, "Well, I guess just, and then he offered me some money, always a motivating factor for all of us. And it was a ridiculously large sum of money for a saxophone lesson. So now I'm curious. I said, fine, because he wouldn't tell me who it was or what the implications were.
Right.
And the long end of the story is I get over to the Ritz-Carlton, and a security team meets me because they got a picture of me off the internet because I'd never read any of these people, and they identified me by name. So, yeah, I'm that guy. He said, "Well, come with us. We got an elevator waiting." And we go up to the 25th floor, which is the presidential suite, and it's completely sealed off. There's more security, but the floor was sealed off except for the guests who were staying there that had the presidential suite and a few rooms around them. And it turned out that the young lady I was going to give a saxophone lesson to was Heather Mills. You remember who Heather Mills was?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
She was most noted for the fact that she was married to Paul McCartney.
Right.
And she was the wife of Paul McCartney at the time, and she was a former model. And Paul was playing at the United Center that night, it turns out. And I go into the presidential suite. They introduced me to Heather. They said that Heather's wanting to learn the saxophone, so she's asked us to find someone. So you're the guy in Chicago, and we'd like you to spend an hour with her. She takes me over to the dining area. There was the presidential suite, massive room. And then she says to me, "Oh, Paul will be down in a few minutes to say hello." At which point I was having a panic attack. I said, "What?" Because I didn't know what I was walking into. And sure enough, about 5 minutes in down this spiral staircase comes Paul McCartney walking over to me. He sticks his hand and says, "Hi, Rick, I'm Paul." And I'm thinking, I've had this dream before, but okay. And you really don't need to introduce yourself, by the way. Arguably the most famous musician on the planet. This went on for an hour, him popping back and forth, and me being a bit unnerved trying to teach his then very limited skilled wife. She didn't have any skills at all in the saxophone, but she had a beautiful horn that they had with her. And we went back and forth. And then she'd talk about Paul, and she'd talk about music, and he'd come back. "How's it going?" And he said, "Did somebody give you tickets to the show?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Give us backstage passes." They'd come in at that point. It was just a remarkable experience. It had really nothing to do with music because I was giving a very amateur player a lesson, which I was happy to, but meeting this legendary figure. And again, I'd worked with Garth Brooks and Ray Charles and wonderful artists throughout my career, but this was unexpected. Again, it was that road that I went down that unexpectedly that morning. A few hours earlier, I was sitting basically in shorts and a sweatshirt in my office. I put on a suit when I walked to the Ritz, and there I am with Paul McCartney an hour later. It was just crazy. And that story traveled around our community. It was like, okay, this is going to be the first line of my obituary, I guess. And anything I did in music is irrelevant. Now this guy spent time with Paul McCartney. That's what I'm going to remember for.
Right. And it's like, had you kept pushing that phone away, you would have missed that opportunity.
Well, that's the other thing about, opening when the opportunity presents itself, don't close the door, open it wide. So,
right. Kick it open.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. That's a really good lesson right there, because a lot of times people, I don't know the number, and they push it off. And that could be just an amazing experience.
Yeah. And honestly, I've never done that since. Anytime I get a phone call that I don't recognize, I pick it up. I see who's there. If it's a solicitor, we deal with it as we would. But I mean, other than that, I would not miss an opportunity like that again. Or almost.
Wow. That's a great story. I love it. So what is your most memorable food that you've ever eaten in all your travels all around? Like, you sit back and you think, well, I'll remember that.
Well, I lack the culinary polish that I should probably have. I have a very basic appetite. So unfortunately, I like meat and potatoes, and I don't eat seafood. My wife's been trying for decades to get that to change. But as far as memorable meals and something that was extraordinary, um, there's a couple times I've gone to the Capitol Grill in Washington, D.C. when working there, and the steaks were out of this world. They really were beyond the franchise of a fine steak dinner. But I can't think of a particular food group that has knocked me out. If I did, it would be something that your listeners probably would say, really? So, a Billy Goat hamburger in Chicago is something I always crave. It's a little dive bar in Lower Michigan Avenue in downtown Chicago, and it's been there for 80 years, and it's a legendary hole in the wall. And it's where John Belushi and the whole Saturday Night Live skit "Cheeseburger, Cheeseburger, Cheeseburger" came from years
Right.
ago. It was his
Yeah.
relatives who owned the grill, so things like that are fun and enjoyable. And I guess they come into the realm of comfort food. I think we
Right.
all look for that every now and then. And
Right.
Taylor Street in Chicago is the Italian neighborhood. I'm Italian by heritage, so I do enjoy going to Taylor Street. I've never had a bad meal there ever, and the Italian foods in Little Italy in Chicago are extraordinary. Little Italy in Baltimore is extraordinary. And North San Francisco, my gosh, some of the best Italian food on the planet, I think, is right in San Francisco on the North End. So,
Yes. When you find really good Italian food, then you know you're onto something. Right? It's like there's good Italian food, and then there's like the really good Italian food.
right.
Same thing
There's
with
the
steaks.
fake
Like,
stuff.
right. I Tom Dreesen was on the show a few episodes ago, and when I asked him about his food, he told a whole story about this very first time he had the steak. And it was steak that was his most memorable food because it was his very first time eating it and how he remembered eating it. It was a fascinating story.
He's a great guy. We've worked with him a few times over the years. He's a Chicago boy. He came from the south suburbs I came from Harvey, Illinois, and had a great career. And his stories with Sinatra alone, I'm sure you covered,
Yes.
are remarkable. His years of being the opening act for Sinatra were quite remarkable. And I think he's just a genuinely nice human being, a really good guy. I hope you got that from him.
He is. I got that from him, and my listeners got that from him. It was one of those conversations that I didn't want it to end necessarily because he was fascinating. But when he told the story about eating that steak, I'm like, wow, you just don't think of those things sometimes. Because other people, I ask that question to almost not every, but most of my guests just to see what they'll say. Because when you travel all around the place, you eat things that are memorable, good, bad, or indifferent. Or you try things, or somebody serves you something, and it's always an interesting thing. But he has a steak story as well. See, so maybe it's part of that Chicago energy.
Yeah, we're meat and potatoes here in Chicago. There's no doubt about it. So,
so
all butchered to the world. Yeah, right. So.
Right. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look at that little synergy there. Okay, so I only have a couple more questions for you, and I really appreciate you taking all this time because this is fascinating. So, when you have a musician that you're working with, or somebody in the orchestra who is feeling kind of stuck, maybe not, like they're not feeling creative or they're not feeling it, and they're kind of stuck. What kinds of things do you do to help them get unstuck?
Well, that's where we speak to people. That's when you have a conversation with somebody to try and help them realize that this great body of work they've created in a lifetime really is a large part of what they've done, and that the moment they're experiencing right now is brief and temporary. Whether it's a lack of work or whether they can't perform at a level they feel they need to, it's all going to come back. It's like writer's block, I would imagine. It's like anybody who has a moment in their creative career where things aren't where they want it to be. It happens to everybody, and so you try to, I think, relate your own personal tale of where you were stuck in the mud and where things weren't going as you would hope they would. And you try and just, be there and support them. No different, I think, than we would support anybody who's having a hard time in their life. And again, right now, 2020, no shortage of finding people having a hard time getting through life. Yeah. It's between the pandemic and all the discourse we've had in this country, it's been very troublesome to lots and lots of people. Right. And I think a lot of people have had great mental anguish because of that. I've had the opportunity to serve on the board of something called the Kennedy Forum, which is a mental health forum that works to change the stigma attached with illnesses related to mental health. It was founded by Patrick Kennedy, who was the youngest son of Senator Ted Kennedy, and they do good work. It's bipartisan work. It's not political at all, really. It's all about mental health, sound mental health. And through that, I've worked with Renee Fleming, who's the great opera diva, and she has a series called Mind and Music in the Mind, and how music relates to the mind. And I did a program with her 3 years ago at the Kennedy Center, where it was about music in the mind. Dr. Francis Collins was on the program, who's a National Institute of Health Executive Director, the National Symphony Orchestra, which I got the guest conduct, and Renee. And they had one scene where Renee Fleming was in a CAT scan. They showed an image of her in a CAT scan tube, And they had her sing while she was in there so they could study the brain and how it reacted when she was taking a CAT scan. It was magnificent. So there's all this music and the mind synergy going on right now. And mental health is a huge issue. And so your question was about basically the mental health and well-being of musicians, if they're either not playing at a level they need to, or if they're having problems. I think it's just all that we're talking about, trying to pick them up and show them that they're loved, we care about them, and that they're going to get through this, and that the body of work that brought them to this point doesn't change. The talent is still there. The energy is still there. They just need to refocus and they need to find it again. And they almost always do. It's
Right. Yeah.
just part of life.
Right. It's those ups and downs of life. But sometimes when people are in that kind of trough area, it seems like that's all there is, And so when there's that voice that can say, yes, and look at these other things and I'll help you out and I'll kind of boost you up along the way, then once they can climb out a little, they can see it,
Right. And you hope they can, because that trough, as you described, is a perfect analogy. I think that we get stuck inside, the tunnel vision of that trough, and feel we can't get out of it. And that's when real harm comes to people, as we know,
Right.
whether they're artists or whatever profession they come out of. When they fall into that hole, it's our job and our moral obligation, our moral obligation to help lift them up out of those situations in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. I've worked in the mental health industry since the 70s, and so I've created internationally known treatment centers for co-occurring mental illness with substance abuse for people, and
Wow.
I worked for a long time with executives and professionals. I started actually the first executive substance abuse treatment center in the country, and then that's
God.
how I got into my work with all the musicians and artists and creatives. Is I started noticing in these different scenarios, they would find me. I'd look up and like all of my favorite clients were musicians or artists, either professionally or not. And then I started realizing, oh, well, we're all gifted. And then I started speaking for the gifted community. And I'm like, oh, and so I started finding the thread through everything all of these years. And I have a passion for really helping the sensitive people and the gifted people find their way in a world that can seem real insensitive. And
wow. Well, I should have done my homework, Dianne. I don't know all of this. This is magnificent to hear this backstory of yours. This is wow.
Yeah. So
it's extraordinary.
That's where the someone gets me comes from, because when someone works with me for the first hour, they go, wow, someone finally gets me.
Wow. Okay. Well,
and so when you're talking about the mental health and being active in that and music in the mind and all of that speaks to my core in ways that probably I have tears in my eyes a little right now because of how powerful it is. It's so important. And we've
seen people, to what you were talking, we've seen people with great challenges that have not been able to overcome them.
Right.
It's very sad to watch. And to be honest, the last 10 years, I've spent a lot of time on doing television shows. Again, the show Empire was a big part of what I did for 6 years from 2004 from 2014 through just this past March when the pandemic hit. We were literally finishing the end of its 6th season. We were on the 19th of 20 episodes of 102 total episodes, and we didn't get to finish the show because the pandemic shut the studio down, and they wound up creating a final episode for the series through pre-existing footage. But I saw a lot of challenges with friends and people we worked with over those 6 years. A lot of suffering, and it has no economic bearing either. We talk about the economy of these problems, and there's no economic bearing on who is struck by this and how they're harmed by it and what they're experiencing. It's very sad, and it's wonderful that you have the ability to help navigate those waters for people who are coming out of those backgrounds. Because I think there's an extra layer of vulnerability put on people in the arts, people who put themselves out there either on camera or on stage. And
yes,
there's a high level of insecurity. I think everybody in this industry, if you don't suffer from it, then there's something missing in your DNA, because I think it's part of what brought you there in the first place.
Right. It's like people don't realize the level of vulnerability as the velocity picks up in the arts, and things. And I work with some people who are household names, and they're regular people with the same vulnerabilities as everyone else, as we all know. And they still have the same challenges, and it's not economic. I think it's sensitive. I think it's how we're wired and how sensitive we are. And then that is where the difficulties can come in. If we have that vulnerability, we don't really know how to manage it,
Right.
And so I'm really, really excited that you're doing that work for people with mental health, because it's so important. People just don't realize it.
Yeah. Right. It really is extraordinary. And again, the person you should have on your show is Renee Fleming. I think you would find her fascinating. I think you would find her compelling. And she has world-class stories. And if you wanted an introduction sometime, I'd be happy to make it.
And I will take you up on that introduction. I could interview her in a minute with that story. Yes.
Well, again, her whole Mind, Music, and the Matters, a series that she's done for 4 or 5 years now. And then she had her own podcast earlier this year that was phenomenal. She had the former Surgeon General on, who's about to become the incoming Surgeon General. She had Patrick Kennedy on. She had Francis Collins. She had all kinds of wonderful guests in the field of medicine and mental health, and in particular how it pertains to the arts. And back to circle back to what we were talking about corporations. I'm just shocked to find out how many people, professional people, have this great musical background in their lives. And it was such a big part of what they do, even though it has no bearing on what they do for a living or that they talk about. Dr. Francis Collins is the executive director for the National Institute of Health. He's a guitar player and a singer. So he was on the Kennedy Center show with us. And it's funny, I didn't know who he was. I didn't recognize him. I mean, once I heard who he was, I was like, oh my gosh, he runs the National Institute of Health. I know exactly. But when I saw him at the dress rehearsal on the stage, he looked like a poor man's version of Paul Stuckey from Peter, Paul, and Mary. I said, who's the guy from the 60s? Because he's got the hair and all that, looking like, with the guitar, who's like kind of singing. And they said, oh, well, that's Dr. Francis Collins. He's okay. And it turned out he was a very good singer and a very capable artist, but heads the National Institute of Health. But him and Renee were very close and remained that way.
And I noticed it when I ran substance abuse centers for professionals, for executives, mostly CEOs and the like, all from all over. All of them had some kind of music, something, or art, but a lot of them music, and either it was quiet or they really still did it or whatever. And it was like there's a common denominator that people don't realize, that when you're a visionary, it comes out in different ways. And you're touched and you're sensitive in different ways than somebody who does not have that in their DNA. So it's quite fascinating.
It is fascinating. And people often hide it. I think they feel that it makes them look less strong if they show a side that appreciates the arts or music. If they're in an environment that, that's hard bit and that's, they're fighting with their corporation or whatever. I think they feel the need to hide that sensitivity aspect sometimes in their lives. And I imagine that's for a lot of people in a lot of fields, whether you're the sanitation worker or whether you're the CEO, you feel that you can't be vulnerable. You can't show that you have any weakness. I get it. My wife will accuse me of that sometimes, that, that I won't want to shed a tear in front of anybody and all that. And, it's hard to expose ourselves because it really takes us completely out of our comfort zone. But I think when we do become vulnerable, I think we benefit from having been down that road. I think it allows us to feel more human and realize that we're holding something in that's probably a lot better to be let out every now and then.
Amen. You couldn't have said that any better. Totally true. Yep. And I think that that's why there's so much angst in the country and so many troubles, because people hold things in that need to be let out in a healthy way, for years, decades and decades.
Yeah.
And this is not a new thing. It's a culmination of years of this trajectory of, well, men, big boys don't cry and don't let anything out. And if you show an emotion, then it means you're weak, when really your strength is in your emotions. And, if you act like a visionary or smart, well, then that's not good. And all those messages are incorrect.
Mm.
They're errors.
Absolutely.
That's maybe, absolutely. That's as close as I'm going to get. So, the only last question I have for you is, if there was going to be a billboard that we were going to put up and the whole world was going to see it with Rich Daniels' message to the world, what would you have on that billboard?
He tried to care for others. That's all. I really do try as best I can. I've been involved with a lot of nonprofits in the Chicagoland area. I've been trying to mentor my children, the young people who come on the television shows, and just try and it's because it was done for me, from my parents to more people that I could name. They cared about me. They gave me things when they didn't have to. And especially people who give you something from their life where they don't benefit from having done so themselves. It's when they give of themselves without any benefit to them having done so. It's a very, very powerful memory that we're allowed to have, because they're doing something for you that you have to realize when you think about it. This is only going to benefit you, because they're not getting anything out of this other than trying to see you be successful, you prosper, you do well in whatever you're trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. So trying to care for others is something I try to work at daily. I fail from time to time, obviously, but it's always in the forefront of my mind. It's and it's just, I think it's the way what we were raised and what we were taught, and the value of each human life, and how it's important to try and make sure everybody can achieve their dream, as someone like me who's been so blessed to achieve so many of mine.
Yes. Oh, amen. Precisely. I have goosebumps with that. Is there anything on your heart that you wanted to say today that I didn't ask you about or didn't come up in our conversation before we end the show?
My wife and I became grandparents 6 weeks ago. We're pretty thrilled, first time. So,
Congratulations. Yay.
so Lucy Therese, if you're watching Grandpa years from now, know that we love you, and we can't wait to see you without a mask on our face and hold you tight.
Oh, exactly. Well, thank you, Rich, for being on the show so much. What a delightful conversation. And you shared so much wealth with everybody.
You're lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Well, remember, everybody, keep your face to the sun so the shadows fall behind you, because you're a rock star and you're here on purpose with a purpose. So go out there and play your own song and see the magic you can create. Until the next episode of Someone Gets Me, be well.
Thank you for listening. I trust you gained some valuable inspiration and information. Please join me and other visionaries in the Someone Gets Me Facebook group. Or for more information on my services and additional episodes, visit someonegetsme.com. Again, thanks for listening.